you've been at this so long now, and here you're at an older age yourself.
Right.
And you've had lots of time to reflect on all these things. What's a starting point for you in this conversation?
Well, I'm really concerned. One of my most important missions in life is to get the news out. You could say I've been trying to do this for years, to try to help people understand that their brain is plastic. That's another way of saying it changes as a function of use. And you can take advantage of that. Everyone should take advantage of that in life, and because it provides them with the opportunity, given their choice, to continue to grow, continue to improve. I mean, everyone has a capability of being better, stronger, more effective next week, next month, as compared to now, and over the long term, to continue to grow and advance your brain as opposed to go into retreat, basically, and on the long slide toward oblivion. And I just have a very focused on trying to help people understand they have this great asset and to make better use of it, to have a healthier and happier older life.
So you developed the program BrainHQ, which I want to come on camera and say gave me a feeling of hope when I was starting. I'm 66. I was just starting to experience some of my own subjective cognitive changes.
Right.
And actually, I've racked my score up 25 points on it.
So
I've had some good success with it. But if it was just those points, that would not be so impressive to me, as I've noticed my work productivity has increased, my mental clarity has increased, my attention to the auditory world, especially in meetings and that type of thing. I have definitely noticed useful field of vision improving. I mean, these are things you deliberately train. Tell us about that.
Well, I came from, I was a scientist who studied the brain and studied its operations as it accounted for fundamental aspects of our behavior. And I was very interested in how the brain was evolved basically as a function of use. Its machinery actually refined itself and advanced itself as a function of how we engaged it. And I realized that this related in a very fundamental sense to brain health itself. I mean, we all more or less imagine that if we have a brain, and if we're more or less in control of our lives, that it's healthy, that we're making the most of it. But in the great majority of this is not true. We're not making the most of it. It's not as healthy as it could be or should be. It needs engagement. It needs exercise. It actually changes its operational capacities, its physical health as a function of how you use it, just like your physical body. So it's really important that we engage it in ways that assure that it's in tip-top shape, or at least if it's sluggish, we advance it. If it's less refined in its operations, we're improving that refinement. We're doing things in our life, ideally in our everyday life. If not, we go to a computer and we look at it and give it some intensive exercise.
And you make it clear in your book that was written for the lay public like myself, Soft-Wired, excellent book. You make it quite clear that the brain training helps. It's like going to the gym. But also we need to embrace other aspects of our lives, as you just said, of course.
Of course. You live a life in a way that's healthy from the perspective of your brain.
Right.
One of the complicated things that's happened is that we've evolved culturally in ways that progressively remove us directly from a physical environment and that change the way our brain is challenged by the lives we lead. And we have in a modern life, we have a period of intense advance in exercise, developing new skills and abilities up to roughly our 30th birthday, somewhere in the middle of it. And then we progressively roll over from being primarily a learner, developer of new skills and abilities, being a user of long-established skills and abilities. We're working more and more on a schedule of automaticity. We're not really paying much attention to what we're doing. Living zombies, go down the street and watch them pass you by. We have a world of living zombies.
Right.
And basically, we're designed to be continuously engaged. In a sense, we're designed to be continuously challenged by life. That was a natural human state. And so we have to sort out how we can keep our brain in there, you can say, as we move forward in life.
Evolutionary-wise, our very survival depended upon it.
Absolutely.
And now my constant refrain has been, it's been a realization for me. It's like a culture, we almost have to be social and cultural subversives to have a healthy brain.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things that we're
Yeah.
given choice to engage in that are all very tempting and very rewarding,
Right.
but not necessarily healthy, right?
That's absolutely right. And, we live in a world in which everything has been done, basically to remove us from it. We paved the road.
Right.
We reduced it in all kinds of ways so that we basically don't have to think very much about any of our basic operations. There's nothing very sophisticated about what's coming in from the world that we have to deal with in a sense in our everyday world. So another way to look at that is we've lost a massive amount of daily exercise in dealing with the realities of an uncertain world full of unpredictability.
Right.
And that's the way we're designed for, but it's not basically the way we live our lives.
True. So you focus on, with the program that you developed, a lot of your room full of dedicated neuroscientists out there, which is fantastic to walk into a room and see a bunch of Ph.D. neuroscientists continuing to evolve the program.
Absolutely.
It's not just a static thing.
Yeah, no. It can always be stronger and better, and we're trying to extend and elaborate what we do to apply to an individual that has special requirements for help.
Yes.
Life is full of vicissitudes.
Yes.
And all kinds of things happen to a person that add to their burden, neurological burden, and that put them at greater risk, you could say, for falling into real trouble. And so we're trying to address those specific distortions and problems that can arise in the brain, you could say, in all kinds of ways by elaborating what we do.
Right.
In our forms of health.
So I looked at Google Scholar, and there's 582 articles credited to you or you and collaborators. And the depth of your science, what I love about you is you're a master at taking this complexity and kind of distilling it down for us. But I've been primarily concerned about cognitive health and the elderly and dementia and all that. But there's so many applications to what you're doing. I saw schizophrenia, mental health. Can you talk more about the broader picture?
Well, there's a general brain health issue, and there are all kinds of ways that it's subject to distortion and deterioration, degradation. And every life doesn't start out in a good way from the neurological perspective. Some children are very disadvantaged in early life, and they need help from a young age. But the brain is plastic. The beautiful thing about it is that it's basically designed to change. And we understand the rules that govern that change. And we take the brain, no matter what the struggle, and we can move it in potentially in a strong corrective direction. So increasingly, we're thinking about brain health from the point of view of managing it. And we're thinking about it from the point of view of preventing the psychiatric breakdown or the neurological collapse. And we know that any brain, we can increase its health, we can grow its resilience. So we just are better at detecting, you could say, the upcoming problem. Then potentially we can manage our way to sustain health. So one of the things that we're trying hard to do is to drive this consideration of managed brain health into medicine. Because we think when you go to the doctor, we go to the doctor now, and the doctor says, "How you doing, Steve?" And you say, "I guess I'm okay." You just had your annual brain exam.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my God, I'm so honored with you about that.
Yeah. I mean, actually,
that's
every time you go to the doctor, there should be, in a sense, a brain check.
Right.
Just like there's a cardiovascular pulmonary check.
Right.
And something should be done, or you should be given some advice.
Yes.
If you're not in fine fettle,
Exactly.
So
you and Dale Bredesen are out of the University of California,
Yes.
San Francisco. You have a professional relationship with him, so
Right.
you're perfectly aware of his cognoscopy.
Yes, I am. Right. No. We've had many conversations about it, and talked about coming at brain health, you could say, from these two different directions.
Right.
Which are both important.
And he totally embraces what you're doing, the cognitive training and the work that he's doing. So you talk about, well, let's go back to resilience for a second, because on the simplistic level, for lay people, we say, okay, so the brain has neurons and And part of what this means is we can increase neurons, and the other part is synaptic connections, but there's so much more that you're identifying that can improve with brain health. Can you talk something about that?
Well, one of the very simple experiments that we did, and initially it was conducted with the support of a couple of wonderful young scientists. One is now a professor at McGill in Montreal, and the other is a professor at the University of California, San Diego. We just made a long list of things that related to the physical and functional and chemical brain. And we ask ourselves, well, we take a brain that's really struggling, and we look at this long list of things. Ultimately, this list has been expanded to about 30 things. And we said, well, how many of these things will be different near the end of life?
Right.
Initially, the studies were done in animal brains because we could look at these things in great detail. And we're going to contrast them with animals in the prime of life, sort of the peak of their ability and their you could say, in control of themselves and of their behaviors. And it turned out that everything was different. 30 for 30, everything's different. And then you say, well, how many of those things actually advantage the old brain? And the answer is none of them. In every way, the old brain is more or less going to blazes, right? I mean, it's down. And the differences are substantial. And just so you know, we did the experiment in another way. We gave a young animal a very terrible life. You could say terrible life. It's not so cool as you. And now we look at that brain grown up as an adult, and we compare it to the brain of it. Same thing, 30 for 30. Everything is degraded. Okay, so I'll get back to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Then the next thing we say, well, how? We know that some of these things we can move by training the animal. How many of them can we move? And the answer is all of them. Now, this relates to things not just that we would relate to the neurology of the brain. It also relates to things that we would relate to how the brain, in a sense, is being taken care of by the vasculature, by its immune response, a whole series of other things that relate to its organic health.
Right.
So you could say the brain in an old animal is going to hell in almost every physical and chemical and functional way. It's not being well supported by the vascular system. There's usually a sharp separation between the tissues of the brain and the blood, and that's crucial because the brain has very poor defenses against infection. We call it that barrier, the blood-brain barrier. Well, it starts to get leaky when you get old. By the way, when it leaks, agents from blood enter the brain, viruses and bacteria, mold spores, other things. Now they can get into the brain and multiply. And the brain has a simple initial defense against them. It coats them with a peptide, which we call beta amyloid, and it forms the amyloid body, which is a signature marker for Alzheimer's disease.
Yes, right.
And that's really marking the fact that the brain has tried to defend itself in Alzheimer's disease. Obviously, it's can no longer keep it up, and the bad consequences of that are greater than the good. But in any event, all of these things are going south, or you could say, that's okay to say, Maine.
Yes.
Right? Together. But then we train the animal, and everything on our list is corrected together if the training is appropriate. And what the training primarily involved was to drive improvements in the speed of operations of the brain and in the accuracy of its operations, you could say, at every brain level. So it can't be just in making more and more accurate distinctions about what's coming into the brain. You also have to speed up its operations as the brain is making decisions about what just happened.
Right.
And be more accurate at making decisions about what just happened. But you can train an animal or a human to do that. And when you do that, everything changes in a positive direction. So in how much does it change? Well, in an animal, the brain looks very much like the brain of an animal that was very much younger. Now, finally, we did this experiment in another way. And that is, and this was done by another former colleague of mine who's now a professor at the University of Shanghai. And he showed that if you train animals in the prime of life, even though they're fine, just train them to take them to a higher level. Now he looks at animals at the same age as the animals we looked at the end of life. And if you're untrained in the prime of life, there's a big difference that's attributed to being trained in the prime of life.
Mm.
I put it another way. You can increase your brain power and your physical and functional brain in all kinds of ways simply by engaging it in your young life.
Mm.
And in fact, what you really want to do, Steve, is engage it all across your life. Of course,
Yes.
you want to be an active, engaged, brain-using person that is basically doing things that are advancing your brain all through the course of your life. Of course,
Yes.
just like in your body, you want to be doing those things. That's the question is, what are those things? And one of the answers is when you engage yourself in activities that improve the speed and accuracy of the operations of your brain, you're pretty sure that everything in that physical machinery has to advance, because in order to be very fast and very accurate, your brain has to be in tip-top shape.
Mm-hmm. So there's a metaphor I use. Tell me if this is an accurate metaphor. So an Olympic sprinter, he's going to participate in a 10-second event, and he goes out there and he just does it 10 seconds, boom, he hits. But the training that he does for that event
Right.
comprises many, many, many things. There are certain elemental things
Right.
that he trains
Right.
in order to get to
Right.
that event.
Right.
Is that an apt metaphor?
Yeah, I liken it to something like a tree. You know, you need the foundation, you need the root and the trunk to support all of the flowering. You know, you basically have to have a very strongly operating machinery to feed, you could say, the higher level operations of the brain. We largely live at the highest level. We're thinking about in the world of dreams and thoughts and complex concepts and their manipulation. You know, that's where, in a sense, our life is, and all of the complexities that relate to our social life and our understanding of things in life.
Right.
But that's all supported by a foundation of strong neurology, you could say. So we have to keep the whole machine in good shape.
Right.
And basically what we commonly think we need to do is to practice those most complicated things. You know, if I just practice problem solving in some complicated level, then I imagine that everything will be fine.
Mm.
Well, everything is not necessarily fine, because actually the machinery that is keeping those high executive and sort of complex controlling operations and information manipulating or movement controlling machinery in good stead can be in very bad shape.
Right.
So basically what's critical is that we keep the whole system alive, the whole brain alive.
Right.
And
And the specific things you're training are things like the parts of the brain that are
Right.
on attention and on visual
Right.
processing
Right.
speed and auditory
Right.
processing
Right.
speed.
And this is the difference in what BrainHQ, basically BrainHQ is an example of a strategy that came from brain science as opposed to psychology. And psychology has made wonderful contributions in these areas, but its primary starting point is behavior.
Mm.
And it's saying, well, you're no longer good at remembering. So what would you do?
Yeah.
Well, you practice remembering. But the reason you can't remember is not because of a lack of practice. The reason you can't remember is because the way the brain is representing information it's trying to record is now no longer represented in a clear form.
Mm.
So it does a very poor job of recording. The information's noisy and it's not really very salient anymore.
Mm.
So the recording step is of course handicapped.
Mm.
So you have to train the brain in its resolving powers.
Mm.
Well, that's not intuitively obvious. But it is obvious from the point of view of understanding how the brain accomplishes remembering.
Mm.
So one of the corrections that's occurred in our science is that there's been an integration of brain science with psychology now that's creating a sort of new integrated understanding
Mm.
that behavior comes from a brain that operates by certain rules, and you have to be knowledgeable about those rules, know those rules, to understand how to fix the machine.
Mm. Mm.
And that applies also to mental illness, applies to how you recover from an injury in the brain, and all kinds of other things that psychology has tried to help with for so many decades.
Mm. I noticed that a new project, or maybe it's been for a while, but I saw an announcement for it, is there's a study that's occurring to see if BrainHQ, the use of BrainHQ can affect acetylcholine
Right.
production in the brain.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, we have preliminary evidence that it does, and acetylcholine is a crucial neuromodulator. It's an enabler of brain change.
Right.
And basically, it plays all kinds of modulatory roles in keeping the brain healthy.
Right.
And we know that when we can exercise the brain in specific ways, we know we engage the machinery that produces acetylcholine.
Right.
And one of the important things we know from animal studies for quite a few years now is that machinery, the machinery that creates all of the critical, they're called neurotransmitters or modulatory neurotransmitters. Dopamine, well, most people have heard about dopamine. It's a crucial modulatory neurotransmitter. Noradrenaline is another critical neurotransmitter. I mean, these are agents in the brain that contribute to, that support, that enable learning and change in brains. And it turns out that all of the machinery that supports them, that controls their production and release, is plastic. And what is it asking for? It's asking for exercise. It's asking basically that you have in your life a program of continuous new learning. And by continuous new learning, I don't mean you continue to read books using the skills of reading that you acquired when you were approximately 6.
Yes, right.
I mean, that's really a good thing to do. I certainly recommend every older person continue to read.
Right.
But it means learning new things, acquiring new skills, acquiring new abilities. Take up that watercolor painting, for God's sake. Pick up that musical instrument or join the choir. Do something new on a sort of regular basis. Go into the shop and build something out of, I don't know what, wood or copper, I don't care.
Right.
But do something new that challenges you and that acquires your mastery of the skills and abilities and understanding. And they're using your body and your brain in different special ways.
Yeah. So one of the things that I gather is for the brain to make the kind of changes that we're talking about, you don't want to just casually engage it, whether it's a computer exercise or a sport.
Right.
You need to be motivated and intent.
Right.
Can you talk about
Well, one of the things that happens in life when you're a baby, the brain basically just takes in information and changes on the face of it because it can't control, in a sense, it can't make an interpretation of the importance of what it is that you're engaged in.
Right.
But actually, it involves that you could say that importance deciding machinery very early in life,
which I find like a very fascinating concept, that the brain itself establishes what is important for it to embrace and to let go.
Isn't that amazing?
It's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah,
I try to get my head around that reading your book.
But it actually begins to make a decision about, you could say, what is rewarding to it. That's one of the primary drivers of it. But also it sets goals for itself. And it has a self-rewarding process when you reach them. But basically the brain takes control. And it only changes when you're older, in a sense, when it matters to it.
Right.
And if you're doing something that doesn't matter to you, it sure as heck doesn't matter to your brain.
Right.
Or if I'm doing something and I'm doing it and I can do it, I can't fail. Every time I do it perfectly. Nothing changes in your brain when you do it.
Right.
I mean, why should it? Why would it?
Right.
The brain is smart enough to understand that it doesn't need to change.
Yeah.
And it actually controls its change. It controls change in a sense so that it only changes when it advances it or advantages it or it interprets it as that. Sometimes they're evil to this because it can seek the drug or it can seek the alcohol or it can seek the thing because they're artificial things we've created to poison ourselves in a sense. But other than that, weakness, basically it's for the good. It's changing for the good and for the advantage. It's telling us to be alert to things that might be a source of danger or consideration or something we should think about, or a positive, or a source of food, or whatever. It's teaching us in all kinds of ways about things of value to it.
Right.
And when we set a goal in the brain, it's continually evaluating the effectiveness of an attempt to achieve the goal. Right. And every time there's a good attempt, it changes.
Right.
Positively.
In real time or like during sleep hours? When does the change occur?
That's really an interesting question to me because it makes the initial change in real time, and then in the next, especially 24 hours, in quiet periods in the same day, and then in sleep especially, it consolidates them. It basically changes the wiring, and then when you sleep, it reverses it. And basically that rehearsal you can think of in deep sleep or in REM sleep, it's a burn-in period.
So
And
hippocampus to
it's
cortex.
converting it to the permanent record, you could say, or the semi-permanent record, because all of these things are semi-permanent.
Yeah. It's all semi-permanent.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. The factor of making it important to yourself. So when I
Right.
use BrainHQ, I try to gear myself up for it. I've said to myself, because
Right.
there's been times where you kind of at work and like, oh, I'll do a little BrainHQ. No, that's not the way to do it. I try to say to myself, this time is for this, and I'm going to do
Right.
this, and I'm going to beat that damn thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, see, let me just make a note about it. It's a lot of times people confuse being engaged with stress.
Right.
And that is to say, if you're doing something that's a little bit difficult, or you can make a mistake,
Yeah.
right? You can say, well, that's stressful. I want a error-free life.
Yeah.
Well, that's wrong-headed.
That's right.
Look at it. I like to say, why not just have a spirited life? Why not have a spirited life in which you're challenging yourself to be a little better about whatever is important to you to do? I mean, maybe I've golfed for 50 years, but my gosh, I'll bet I could be a little better around the green if I really tried harder.
Right.
And why not just take a spirited approach to everything that you do?
Yeah.
And just say, well, listen, Matt, I think I can be I can improve this a little bit. The way to sustain yourself is to live life with energy. It's to live life awake to life. And I just think that a lot of times people in their withdrawal and they're seeking a life of ease are just mistaken about what a good life is all about, because a good life is a life with energy.
Yeah.
And it's a life actually being alive.
Yeah. Well, the mere fact that we even exist is kind of a mind-blowing thing by itself. We shouldn't take it for granted, and we should engage it with spirit,
Right.
just as you say.
Yeah, right.
To come back to the program, I think it's important for people to understand that there's your masterful neuroscientists out there. Keep it at an 80%.
Right.
Keep
Right.
you at an
Right.
80% success rate, which
Right.
means a 20% failure rate.
Yeah, right.
And I try to say to people, yeah, but that's where the improvement comes. That's
right.
That's the workout.
It's actually the optimum rate in which the brain is changing positively. And it's a way to think about it in life, is that if you're always doing things that are just dirt simple, then it's no real advantage to your brain. I mean, it might be fun for you. People love to do things perfectly to a T. But actually, that's not really advantaging your brain or addressing issues of brain health. And life, again, in the native human state, was continuously challenging.
Yes.
It wasn't. We didn't have all of this life of ease, but there's somewhere between a life in which you're really struggling to survive and a modern life.
Mm.
And it's a life with personal energy and involvement and engagement.
Mm.
And so that's where I think the sort of natural, you could have fun substitute is. It's to actually live a life with energy and engagement and continuously learning. You can't tell me anybody is not advantaged just to look at life as an opportunity to continually grow.
Mm.
Well, I've never been to the ballet. Why would I want to go to the ballet? Well, gosh, and what could I learn about the ballet? And maybe I could even try to move like, I mean, I went to the ballet last night, by the way. It was fabulous. Anyway, the point is that there are always things in life to do that you'd be interested in, that can enrich you.
Yes.
And that could be good for your brain to do.
Yeah.
And
do you think seeking mastery is the best way to go, or changing things up? So in the past, I took up PickleBall.
Yeah.
You know what that is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I love PickleBall. And it seems to be, matter of fact, I intend to write an article for PickleBall magazine.
Yeah.
Comparing the skills that come about in PickleBall to what you're training in BrainHQ.
Sure.
It's the same kind of thing.
Sure.
Sure.
No, and net games are great because they require that you make fast decisions. The actions that are required of you are richly various.
Right.
Variable, and then you're moving, you're controlling your body in elaborate ways, and hopefully you're progressively. improving at your ability to make these fast judgments in time and fast and accurate responding. I mean, it's an example of a rich source of brain engagement and positive brain change. It's an example that getting that in, ping pong, tennis.
No, you guys have a ping pong table out there.
Yeah, of course. By the way, I've never gotten better than about fourth place, so. But I'm still trying.
Yeah. So one of the things that comes up in the popular press and all that has been well, there's so many scholarly articles written and researches about BrainHQ. Right? There's other programs where the criticism comes up. It's like, well, you're just training yourself to do better at this program,
Right.
But does it translate to real life?
Right.
What is your...
Well, actually, it's not really what we're doing. I mean, what we're trying to do is we're trying to change the machinery of the brain so that whatever it's engaged to do, it does with higher accuracy and efficiency and potentially potentially higher speed.
Right.
And we know it in a host of ways. I mean, we've made measurements over and over. We have almost 145, 150 controlled trials done in different human populations in which we've documented the change. And then there are many, many other studies that have been done with programs like this and other settings. But what we know is that we're changing the machinery of the brain in which the brain is operating with that better machinery in everything it does. So that's why when you look at, you can train a person for 10 hours in a single exercise like double decision, and it cuts the self-driver caused accidents in half for people that use it of an older age. That use it.
Right.
And that's generalization.
Yeah.
You didn't do any driving or practicing driving in the dream, right? And now you're out in the world and you find out that the advantages you gain from that, you respond when you're going 30 miles an hour, 50 feet sooner at an intersection when you have to.
Yeah.
Now 50 feet's a long distance.
Yes, it is.
So, I mean, in all kinds of ways, you can just demonstrate that you've advantaged yourself in extension. And in study after study, there is direct evidence of generalization to things that are measured that advantage you.
Yeah. Well, you brought up an important one. So you have a drive safe program.
Right.
And we're both from rural states.
Right. In
my state, and I'm sure in your home state, driving is crucial. Once you start losing the ability to drive, suddenly your life shrinks down.
Right.
So
and if you stop driving, there's a 4-fold increase in the probability that you'll die in the following year.
Wow.
So people in a sense, and driving is important because driving gives you access to the world.
Yeah.
And the world is where you get a lot of your brain exercise.
Yeah.
It's there are people, of course, that are homebound that just can't,
right,
or that are limited in their physical movement, and they have they have to do special things to keep their brain alive and healthy. So that they can do that. I mean, they shouldn't be discouraged by that. They could do a lot of things. But driving is a big advantage because it gets you out there.
Yeah.
In the social world and in the world of interaction, it's just a lot easier for you to keep yourself really alive and healthy if you can get out there.
Yeah. It's such a tricky thing because, as I told you prior to the show, I always like to be very careful because I work very directly with people who are suffering dementia themselves or slipping into that.
Right.
B, the families, it's painful,
Oh, yeah.
So I always try to be really careful about what I'm saying when I'm talking about optimal brain health. So if we can get a little more granular with that. Now, first, the obvious thing is normal age-related changes. BrainHQ is going to be effective. How far, so mild cognitive impairment, do you feel like you can comfortably say it helps people with MCI?
Well, there's no question that it helps them.
Yeah.
So there are really nice studies, probably the best have been conducted by scientists in Europe and at the University of Rochester. And there are several really big, beautiful trials that are now underway in Florida and in New York and other places. But basically, they show that the BrainHQ exercise, for example, is just broadly very, very positively helpful.
Yeah.
in reconnecting the areas of the brain that are becoming disconnected, in recovering ability that's been lost, and quite a large number of people that are in the diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment are brought out of it just by brain training. But there's more than brain training to brain health.
Yeah.
And you should also be concerned about several other really important factors. You should be, and many of these issues are raised by Bredesen in his model.
Yeah.
And that's the understanding that there are agents out there in the world, for example, first of all, that are threatening to the brains.
Yes.
You know, you can't have chronic enduring untreated infections. You can't have a heavy daily dosing of mold spores or a variety of other things like that.
Right.
That basically want to enter your brain and do damage there.
Right.
You also have to consider the sort of inventory or category of how the brain is being fed and how it's sustaining itself chemically, and so there are a variety of other things that should be managed in your health. And again, if you had a medicine that was actually managing brain health, if we could really have that generally installed, then all of these things would be paid attention to. You'd be concerned about that chronic infection. You'd be worried about something like a persistent source of mold spores. You'd be concerned about chemical imbalance in a body that clearly disadvantages or contributes to weakness, or expressing a weakness in the brain.
Right.
So you know, being healthy when you reach the epoch of potential disaster requires taking a more serious approach to brain health and its management. Now, hopefully, you had led your life before then.
Yeah.
in ways that, at the very least, substantially delayed that period of in which things really began to turn south.
Right.
And so the first task you have as an older person is to keep your brain alive and healthy to your best of your ability. But if you fall into that, and then also, and on the background, and absolutely as part of your consideration, think about what's happening from the point of view of how you're feeding your brain, and what factors in your environment may be compromising your health. Right. And that's what the Bredesen protocol is basically helping to do.
Well, yeah, especially when he talks about glycotoxicity, for example, or then the nutritional support of the brain so they can actually recreate structures. And when you were talking about the leakiness of the blood-brain barrier, is that caused by just kind of the many factors that lead to brain inflammation?
Right.
And it's the inflammation that causes that leaky blood-brain barrier?
Well, actually, we can make it happen. We can train the brain so that it leaks.
Oh, gosh.
We don't. Again, this is something that was accomplished, but basically by exposing it, for example, by making the machinery of the brain very disorganized and noisy and dysfunctional, just like it is in an old brain. But also, and here's the good news, when you train the brain and improve its operations in speed and accuracy, you close the leaking. It's plastic.
Really?
The blood-brain barrier, we're not sure exactly why. We know that we understand the basis of the brain controlling its blood flow.
Yeah.
And it controls its blood flow through an intimate association of not nerve cells, but with non-neuron cell population of the brain called star cells in the brain. And they communicate from the nerve cell in the brain to the blood vessel, to the capillary that's delivering the nutrients to the brain. And we know how they control the flow of blood into the brain as the brain is active. The brain has this fabulous thing that it sends nutrients and oxygen exactly where it's needed through its capillaries by basically this process. But we think that the same, and this is highly regenerative, these processes are completely, this goes to places again in a poorly tended brain in old age. You become very poor at controlling blood flow as a function of the brain. But it's highly plastic. So again, when we engage the brain and train it so that it's now operating in good shape, at speed and with accuracy, and how everything is more strongly connected, this is recovery. You recover the ability to control blood flow. You also recover with it the control of the barrier. The barrier seals again. So we think one of the critical things in brain health is to keep that blood-brain barrier intact and strong, resilient to the penetration by bacteria or mold spores or any other bad agent. And while you're doing it in the bargain, the same training, very fortuitous, it also helps you sustain the nutritive supplies, sources to your brain as it's acting. So it's a very good thing to keep your brain in good shape.
Yeah.
And this is one of the benefits, is that we think you can sustain the barrier for bad agents to come in and try to bloom in your brain.
Yeah. We're coming towards the end of our conversation here, which I deeply regret because I so have loved meeting you. Seriously.
Lots of fun.
Seriously. But you said something that I thought was wise and profound. You say many things that are wise and profound, but on page 209 of your book, Soft-Wired, you talked about spreading joy as a source of good brain plasticity yourself and for others. Can you say more about that?
Well, it turns out it's just a fabulous thing. It's a feature or designed by God or Mother Nature, whoever did it, whoever's responsible. That is a really good idea. And that is that when we exercise, when we receive a gift, when somebody's kind to us, basically, or when we accomplish something that we're really proud of, we feel this surge of joy. And we're actually engaging the machinery of our brain that contributes to those positive good spirits. And this is a critical source neuromodulatory machinery in our brain. It's actually directly controlling aspects of brain change and learning. This dopaminergic system, dopamine is the primary agent. It turns out when we give a gift, when we're kind to something, we have the same feeling. And it turns out the reason we have the same positive feeling is because we exercise the same machinery. Well, if you think about it, I can't control the rate at which you're kind to me, right? But I have absolute control of the rate at which I'm kind to you. And in fact, if I'm an agent of joy in the world, I'm continually exercising the machinery of my brain, which is critical for two things. It's critical to keep my brain change machinery in good shape. And it's critical for my sustaining capacity to have joy. And why wouldn't I want to exercise both things? So it turns out it's a real good idea to be a positive agent in the world. And to the extent to which you think about you can be generous and positive and helpful to other people, understand that it's helpful. Your brain is asking you to do this. It's asking you to be the good mother in the family. It's asking you to be the agent of joy and help. And so basically, and besides, it's compatible with because every time you do it again, you get that little positive indication that something good has happened, and it has.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to meet you. Well, thank you. But for our Central Coast, or not Central Coast, I'm in California now, but for our Mid-Coast Maine senior college that we're going to be doing, we have a 16-hour course coming up. Do you have any words of advice for those folks as we launch into our very first 16-hour course in optimal brain health?
Well, wow. Hey, take your brain seriously. And just understand that you're in charge. You're in charge of your brain health, and you're also in charge of your, you have the capacity to be better every week, every month, every year in your life, to be a stronger, more effective person. So why not do that? Take advantage of this great gift you've been given, and if you don't, you're just a damn fool.
Thank you, Mike.
You bet.
Thank you.